Hello everyone, welcome again. Well, in this video, I'm going to discuss how to automate the OAuth 2 token generation mechanism. And for the automation, I will use the Selenium framework and RestAssured framework. Before we start with the implementation part, let us understand how the OAuth 2 token is generated. So let us assume that there is a web application. This application has certain endpoint exposed. There is an external application which wants to access those endpoints. To access the endpoints exposed by the web application, external application has to specify the access token. So these are the steps external application will do to get the access token. First, the app will send the request to this endpoint. This endpoint is going to redirect the request to a page where user need to provide its login detail. After the authentication and authorization, this endpoint is going to return back a authorization code to the external application. In the subsequent request, the external application will send the request to this endpoint. In the request, the app will attach authorization code as well as certain security detail. Once this endpoint validates all those information, it will respond back with access token, and this access token can be used by the external application to access the endpoint exposed by this web application. Now to demonstrate this entire flow, I will take the help of Dropbox application. So in the developer console of the Dropbox, I have created an application. This application has access to this directory. Anything which is present in this directory can be accessed by this app. This application has its own app key and app secret as well as the redirect URL. So whenever I'm using this application to get the token, once I provide the login detail, I will be redirected to this URL. For the demonstration purpose, I have used the URL as google.com, but in the real time, it will be different. Let me open the API documentation of Dropbox and look at the endpoint by which you can generate the token. So here is the authorization flow. So this is the URL which we need to use. Along with this URL, we need to specify certain path parameters. So we need to specify the client ID. Then we need to specify the response type. And then we need to specify the redirect URI. These are the three path parameters we need to specify to get the token. So the client ID, we can get it from the app console. The response type is code. So first we are going to generate the authorization code and then use that authorization code to get the token. I will copy this URL and open a new session. So here I need to specify the login details. And once I hit the enter, so it will redirect me to the URL what we have specified in the app console. Okay. And if you pay attention to the current URL, you can see here we have a code. This is the authorization code which we need to use to generate the token. Now let us look at the other endpoint using which we can get the access token. If you look at the documentation of this endpoint, there are certain parameters which we need to specify, and those parameters should be in the form of URL encoded. So the parameter which we need to specify is the authorization code, grant type as authorization code, redirect URI, client ID, and client secret. So this is the code. The grant type will remain authorization code. Redirect URI is the same as what we have specified in the app console. And this is the client ID and client secret. And then I will send the request. So this is the access token which is given to us. Now I can use this access token to access any of the Dropbox API. So let us try to use this endpoint. Using this endpoint, you can get the list of all the files and folder which is present in this directory. So in the authorization, I will select the bearer token, specify the token here, and then specify the request body. So this is the request body, and I have already given that. And let me send the request. So this is the folder which we have here, and there is a file called design patterns. So this is the file name. So as you can see here, this is how you get the OAuth 2 token and use that token to access the REST APIs. So as you can see here, in this entire process, the manual step was to log in into the Dropbox application and get the code. So for that part, we will use the Selenium framework. And for rest of the part, that is for getting the token and accessing the endpoints of the Dropbox API, we will use the RestAssured. Now let us discuss about the design. That means what are the set of classes which we need to create in order to automate this flow. So the first class which I'm going to create is Chrome WebDriver. The responsibility of this class is to create the instance of Chrome browser. Then we will have a second class called OAuth helper. So this class is going to call the Chrome WebDriver class to get the instance of Chrome browser. And the second responsibility of this class is to send the request to the authorized endpoint and extract the authorization code. And the third class is our test class, where we are going to call the endpoint to get the list of all the files and folder. So in the pom.xml of the project, I have already added the dependency for Selenium as well as Chrome driver. So let me go ahead and create a new package. And let me call it as OAuth 2. Inside this package, I'm going to create a class called Chrome WebDriver. So when I open this URL, which has the information about the client ID and redirect URI, Dropbox automatically redirect me to the login screen. And in order to interact with this web element, we need a locator. And I have already captured the locator for all these web elements. In this class, we have two methods, one to get the Chrome option and another one is to get the instance of the Chrome driver. So in case if you need to provide any additional argument before launching the Chrome browser via WebDriver API, you can provide all this configuration in the implementation of this method. And in order to create the instance of Chrome driver, we will use WebDriver driver equal to new Chrome driver. And we also need to set the system property that will tell us the location of the Chrome driver executable. So on my local system, this is the location of the Chrome driver executable. And then I will call system.setProperty. So this is the property value, and the property key is webdriver.chrome.driver. And then I'm going to return the driver object. And while creating the instance, I need to specify the instance of Chrome option. So I will call this method over here. Then I will add another class, that is OAuth helper. Inside this class, I will create a set of methods that will help us to extract the authorization code. A variable of type WebDriver to deal with the web page in this class, and a variable of type WebDriver weight to add the dynamic weight. And these are the locator for all the web element which we are going to interact. So this is the method which is going to create this URL for us. There will be a method for login, another method for setting up the driver, so these are the set of methods which we are going to use, and it will get clear once we start providing the implementation of each method. So string URL, string.format, so this is the URL, basically the base URL, and then I will stuff the client ID and redirect URL. So this method, that is the get base URL, will return this URL, and this is the URL which we are going to open in the browser. In the implementation of this method, I'm using a method called string.format, which is going to stuff the client ID as well as the redirect URL, which is being passed as parameter to this method. And let me just print out the base URL. And return it. After this method, we are going to implement the setup method. In the implementation of the setup method, I will just set the implicit wait, page load timeout, and maximize the browser. After this method, we will implement the login method. In this method, first I will wait for the sign in button to show up. Then I will provide the username and password. Click on the sign in button. So wait.until expected conditions class. Visibility of element located by, and the locator is submit, which is of type by. Then specify the username. After this, specify the password. And then click on the submit button. Now let me go back to the UI. So as soon as I click on sign in, the Dropbox API generate the code and redirect me to the google.com. So if you pay attention to the URL in the current window, you can see this is the code. So I will put a wait condition, and the wait condition will check whether we have a code in the current URL or not. So wait.until expected conditions class dot URL contains this substring. Now let us implement the method that is get OAuth token. So here I will use try finally. And the reason I am using finally block is because in case if something happens, I want that our WebDriver to be shut down. And we know that the finally block will get executed irrespective of any situation. I will just put a null check here and call the quit method. Now let me create the constructor where I'm going to initialize these two variables. So as soon as you create the object of this class, both of these two variables will be initialized. Driver equal to Chrome WebDriver dot get Chrome driver, and wait equal to new WebDriver wait driver, and timeout is 30 seconds. So first we will call the setup method here, which will initialize all these settings. After this, we will get the base URL. We specify the client ID and redirect UI. And then we will open this URL in the browser. And then we will call the login method. After this, we will get the current URL in the browser. So let me create a local variable for that. And then I'm going to return the authorization code after extracting it from the URL. So pass token and current URL. So if you pay attention to the current URL, this is the URL which we get after providing the login details. So I can just split the string based on this delimiter and then get the index one from the array to get the token. Split it based on the delimiter and get the entry at the index one. And let me also print the authorization code. So this is the implementation of OAuth helper class. We have methods using which you can extract the authorization code after login in the Dropbox application. And let me go ahead and create the test class now. So in this class, I will create a static method. The annotation which I want to use with this method is before class. In the implementation of this method, I will get the authorization code as well as token and then use that token in the subsequent request. We want to get the access token only once. That's why I'm going to put all that piece of code in the before class method. So let me create two variables. So in this method, I'm going to create the object of this class and call the method that is get OAuth token. So new OAuth helper dot get OAuth token. Let me also create the variable for all these parameters. Once I have the authorization code, then I'm going to send the request to this endpoint to get the access token. And for this part, I will use the RestAssured framework. If you look at the response of the endpoint, it is in JSON. So I can use the JSON path to extract the access token. So now we have the token and we can use this token to send the subsequent request for accessing the Dropbox API. So now I will create a test method. In RestAssured framework, there is a method by which you can specify OAuth2 token directly. So .auth .oauth2 and the token .when .post .then assert on the status code and extract the body. And then I will print the response. So let me go ahead and run this script. And now let us look at the console. So this is our base URL. After sending request to this URL, we got the authorization code and from which we generate the token, and this is the output after sending the get request to the endpoint, which will give us the list of files and folder. This is the information about the folder and this is the information about the file. So when I execute this particular task, basically it launches the browser, open the URL, extract the code, and then use that auth code to generate the token. So if you actually look at this entire scenario, the launching of the browser is just for getting the code. We can avoid that browser to be launched in the foreground by running it in a headless mode. So in our class, that is Chrome WebDriver, I will pass certain additional argument which will run the browser in a headless mode. So for this, I will use option dot add additional arguments. The first one is the headless. The second argument is disable GPU. And the third argument is related to the size. So in my case, I prefer to launch the Chrome browser with the same resolution what I have currently on my system. So that's why I will use this third parameter. And in order to get the current resolution, I will use the toolkit API. So toolkit.get default toolkit.get screen size. This is going to return us the type as dimension. And inside this object, there are certain APIs which will give you the width and height. And if you recall, when I launched the Chrome browser, there was a pop-up saying that it is being controlled by some automated process. We can avoid that pop-up by using this switch. So option.set experimental option. The switch name is enable switches and the corresponding value. So let me go ahead and rerun the script. And this time we will not see the browser launching in the foreground, rather it will be running as a headless process. And our test passed. And this is the output of the get endpoint. So as you can see here, with the help of Selenium WebDriver and RestAssured framework, you can automate the OAuth 2 token generation scenario.